If you're still awake, there's probably a reason. This is Boring History Nights, where history doesn't speak loudly, but long enough to hush the dark. You might not have come for history, maybe just for something slower than your thoughts. The air doesn't move. Somewhere, a chair creaks, or maybe it's just your breath brushing the quiet. Dust hangs mid-fall, like time forgot what it was doing. Whatever warmth you carried, it wouldn't have lasted the night. Let's not stretch this too fast. If something about this quiet spiral makes the night pass easier, you can subscribe. Only if you'd want to hear the next one drift by. And if you're still awake, say where the night found you. I read them all, even the ones that just say still here. Now let the dark stay dark. Let whatever follows arrive slowly, like it's always been here. You don't have to keep up. Just listen. This is Boring History Nights, and you're already inside it. It starts without a name. You are called, not asked. You arrive, not welcomed. A door opens, not for you, but for the child. They don't know your name. You barely know theirs. And that will be enough. More than enough. Because in the world you've stepped into, names are for remembering. And you are meant to be forgotten. Your feet ache before the threshold. You haven't rested since before the sun began to think about rising. But you press forward, skirts wet with frost, arms already aching from memory. They meet you in silence. The steward, a folded ledger in one hand, nods. The lady, pale and distant, doesn't speak. She gestures toward a cradle as if it were a task to be checked off a list. She's not cold, just distant, like someone who misplaced a feeling and hasn't bothered to find it again. The child is small, smaller than you imagined, and quieter. You expected wailing, the kind that shakes windows and demands answers. But this one is curled in silence, the kind that makes you look twice to see if they're breathing. You kneel before the crib, not because anyone asked, but because it feels like you should. They watch. You lift the child slowly, as if they might break. They don't. But something inside you shifts when their head finds the hollow of your neck. A weight settles in your bones, old and unfamiliar. They are not yours, but your body doesn't know that yet. Your arms cradle, your breath steadies, and beneath your breast, something lets go. A muscle long tensed by grief, now softened by instinct. You guide them to feed. The latch is awkward at first. They struggle, fumble, adjust. But then they find you, and everything becomes quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that means absence. The kind that means something essential has begun. You look up once. The lady has turned away. The steward has gone. It's just you and this stranger and a stillness that could mean safety or exile. You don't know yet. You hum without thinking. A melody no one taught you. A tune passed down from women who carried too much and asked too little. The child hears it. Or maybe they feel it in your chest, in your breath, in the pulse of your grip. They drink slowly. And with each swallow, you feel less like a visitor and more like a vessel. A medieval wet nurse is not a nurse, not a servant, not quite a mother. You are something in between, something unnamed, something necessary but never celebrated. No one paints you into family portraits. No one writes your name in family trees. You are the milk, not the memory. Still you stay, because the baby is fed, because your arms are steady, because your heart, though quiet, has already begun to split. You don't sleep that night. Not really. The room they give you is cold. The hearth hasn't been lit in weeks. The blanket is thin, made for someone who doesn't bleed. You lie there, eyes open, listening to the child breathe in the next room. You know their rhythms already. You know when they sigh in sleep and when they cry in dreams. Your breasts ache, not from pain, from fullness, from waiting. You press your palm flat against your chest. It's too warm. You whisper, low, asking the pain to wait a few hours more, to not leak, to not stain, to not make this harder than it already is. It doesn't listen. Milk isn't obedient. It flows when it's ready. Like grief, you rise before the bell. You don't need an invitation. The child is awake, not crying, just alert. Their eyes search for something, or someone. You step into view, and they stop moving. You lift them. They lean into you, and in that moment, your usefulness becomes undeniable, which means your distance must grow. The rules are clear, though never spoken. Feed them, calm them. Do not love them. Do not linger. Do not become essential. But your body, warm, rhythmic, full, is essential by nature. And the child does not know the rules. They root. They nuzzle. They listen for the heartbeat that isn't theirs but feels close enough. You nurse again, and with each swallow, you lose something. Something small, a memory, a breath, a piece of your child's scent. You give it anyway, because that's the work. There's no record of your arrival, no parchment, no contract, just a nod from a steward and a whispered agreement in the marketplace 2 weeks before. You had milk. They had need. That was enough. Your own child, left behind, in someone else's arms, fed by someone else's hands, maybe soothed by songs that aren't yours. You try not to think of them now, but the pain isn't just in your breast. It's in your silence, in your stillness, in the way your mouth forgets to form their name. You'll see them again, eventually, when this child grows teeth, when the manor no longer needs your warmth. You'll go back, and hope they remember, and fear they don't. Later that night, you stand by the crib. The child is asleep, their breath steady, their fists unclenched. You place your hand on the edge of the wood, just there, not inside, just enough to feel connected. You whisper something, not in words, just sound, just the breath of a woman who has given something that cannot be named and will never be returned. Your name is not written down, but your body remembers. Your body always remembers. If your eyes are fading, let them. The story wasn't waiting for anyone. There is a moment after the child feeds, when the room settles into a particular stillness. The fire clicks softly behind you. The cradle rocks in gentle rhythm, and the weight in your arms begins to shift, not in pressure, but in meaning. They are no longer only a child. They are the future. And you, the vessel that sustains it. It would be easier, perhaps, if your body didn't know the difference. If your hands were simply hands. If your milk were simply nourishment. If your voice didn't tremble when the baby turned its head toward you, not from hunger, but from something else, something nearly like trust. But you do feel it, and it changes everything. The household knows your purpose, and nothing more. You are not their equal, not even close. You do not enter the great hall. You do not walk among the tapestries or stand near the hearth when the ladies' friends arrive. Your shoes are made of canvas and dirt, not leather. Your fingers are cracked, not softened with rose water. Your name is not spoken unless something is needed. And still, your body provides what theirs cannot. There is no hatred, not openly. That would be impolite. There is only the cold politeness of utility. They glance over you when you pass, nod if they must, refer to you indirectly. You are the nurse, or her, or the woman from the village. Never more than that. But when the child is sick, they look to you. When the child cries, they listen for your steps. When the child feeds well, they assume their care has succeeded. It hasn't. What has succeeded is you aching, silent, awake long after the lamps have been snuffed. You, rising before the birds stir. You, eating less so that the milk remains strong. You, offering a lullaby without words because your grief might break into the melody. This is the division they will never name. Your body becomes property the moment it proves useful. There is no ceremony for this, no contract signed, only a glance from the steward and a quiet nod when the lady sees that the child has latched properly. And just like that, you are theirs. The lady does not hate you. In fact, she may even be grateful, but it is a complicated sort of gratitude, the kind that leaves her watching you longer than necessary from the doorway, then turning away quickly as if caught doing something inappropriate. Sometimes, her hand tightens around the edge of her bodice. Not jealousy, perhaps something older than that, something closer to shame. You wonder if she fed the child even once. You wonder if she tried. There are stories in the village of noble women who refused to nurse because it was vulgar, because it ruined the shape of their breasts, because it weakened the body, because the church sometimes whispered that a woman's milk carried her soul. And what if the soul was not fit to give? Some believed milk could transmit emotions, that sorrow could be passed on through the breast, that anger could curdle it, that the warmth in a child's belly was a reflection of the heart that fed them. You don't believe in all the stories, but you know this: you have fed a child while grieving, and it made them restless. You have fed a child with calm in your chest, and they slept more soundly. You cannot explain it. You don't need to. The milk remembers. And so do you. At the market once, before you were called to the manor, you saw a noble woman standing beside her wet nurse. The child was dressed in silk, cradled in the arms of the nurse, suckling calmly. The noble woman spoke of politics with a cousin, barely glancing at the child. She adjusted her hair ribbon 3 times. Her hands never touched the baby. You watched for a moment too long. The nurse noticed you. There was no smile, only recognition, and perhaps apology. You looked away. You wonder what happened to that child. If they grew, strong and clever. If they ever knew the scent of the woman who carried them. Or if the scent they remember belonged to someone nameless, someone like you. Back in the manor, you begin to notice the spaces you are allowed to enter and those you are not. You may enter the nursery, the servants' corridor, the kitchen, though never during noble meals. You sleep in a room with no hearth, though the child sleeps beside one. Your wash basin is chipped. Theirs is polished copper. Your cloth is scratchy. Theirs is perfumed with lavender. You are allowed to rock the baby, but you are not allowed to hold them with affection once they've eaten. You may sing, softly, but only in the nursery. You may wipe their mouth, but not kiss their cheek. The lady has not said this. She doesn't need to. The walls say it. The way the maid stiffens when she catches you brushing your thumb along the baby's temple. The way the steward clears his throat when he finds you humming too long after feeding. The way the noble guests don't speak while you are in the room, as if your presence is too intimate for polite conversation. You do not belong, and yet, you are essential. This contradiction becomes your life. You start to measure time differently, not in days, but in feedings, in wet linens, in nap cycles, in the slow rounding of the baby's limbs, in the way their eyes now follow you from the cradle to the chair. They know you, and in some quiet way, you know they love you, but it is not a love that can be spoken, not here, not aloud. You think about your own child every time you nurse. Every time, you imagine them growing in your absence, learning to crawl, to speak, to look for you, and then to stop looking. You remember the day you left. They clung to your dress, not with desperation, but with familiarity. You had to pry your own fingers from theirs. You told them you'd be back soon. You lied. There are nights when the baby won't sleep unless your arms are the ones that rock them. The lady watches, tight-lipped, as the child calms in seconds under your hum. Strange, she says once, they never take to me. You say nothing. You want to say it isn't strange at all. You want to say love is louder than silk. You want to say you never even tried. But your mouth stays still, because truth here has no weight. Only milk does. One evening, the child reaches for you in front of guests. The lady lifts the baby from your arms, but the child cries and twists and leans back toward you. It is subtle, barely seen, but enough. Enough to silence the room. Enough for the lady's hand to still. Enough to remind everyone that you, the woman in plain cloth, barefoot on their polished floor, are the one who carries the warmth that calms their air. You retreat from the room after, and for the first time, you feel ashamed of the bond. As if it were a thing stolen. As if you took something that did not belong to you. You sit alone that night, watching the moon rise through a crooked window, and wonder if all love is borrowed, or if some is just invisible until it grows teeth. You say your own child's name aloud once, just to remember how your voice wraps around it. You promise, quietly, that the child in the manor will not replace them, but the ache in your chest says otherwise. The milk flows again the next morning. The baby drinks. You rock. The house pretends not to notice, but it does. Every creak of the floorboards, every glance that lingers a second too long, every servant who pretends to be too busy to meet your eyes. They all know, and still, no one says a word. Because in a medieval household, class is law. And law, unlike children, cannot be held or softened or sung to sleep. It began with a knock that wasn't meant for you, but you opened the door anyway. They didn't ask your name, not really, just whether you were the one with milk, whether you had lost a child recently, whether your husband was still alive. You nodded to one of those things, and before the door was fully closed behind them, your life had changed. There was no scroll, no ink, no trembling hand reaching for a quill to sign away what little agency you had. There were only glances, some too kind, most too efficient. There was a sack of flour, a coin for the road, and a place to go where someone else's baby would be crying soon. The contract, if one existed at all, was your silence. No one tells you that the beginning of servitude often looks like kindness, that it comes with warm stew, a bath you didn't draw yourself, and a bed softer than straw. But the softness deceives you. It is not yours to keep. Nothing here is. Not the clothes, not the room, not even your own hours. You are not here because they trust you. You are here because your body is useful and the lady's is not. Her breasts are dry. Her milk never came, or perhaps she never let it. It is not for you to ask. Still, you wonder. The first time you hold a child, they whimper. You murmur something beneath your breath, not words, just memory shaped into tone. It soothes them. The nurse watching in the corner lowers her brow and scribbles something on a piece of paper. Perhaps she notes your natural temperament. Perhaps she writes nothing. Perhaps she just pretends, as all things here are layered in pretense. You are expected to perform a kind of sacred imitation, to become mother without being mother, to nurture without forming bond, to offer flesh without becoming family. You are meant to stay quiet, to move gently, and above all, to vanish once your usefulness has passed like breath on glass. And yet, everything inside you resists the role. You do not say this aloud. You do not even say it in your thoughts. But it hums beneath your skin when the child touches your collarbone or clutches the edge of your apron with that instinctive trust. It throbs behind your ribs each time you remember the baby you left behind, the one who knew your heartbeat from within. No one prepared you for the theft that doesn't feel like stealing. Because how do you grieve something you were never allowed to claim. Days stretch without landmarks. Time is measured in feedings, in changing linens, in the number of times the child hiccups while drowsing in your arms. You begin to disappear from yourself, a slow shedding of will that feels almost like peace, but isn't. You aren't unhappy, exactly. You are clean, fed, and your work is gentle, but you are not free. Freedom isn't about having somewhere to go. It's about being able to leave when you choose. And here, though no shackles wrap your wrists, your duties bind tighter than any chain. You serve in a space between classes, both inside and apart. The maids whisper about you, sometimes kindly, sometimes with curled lips. You aren't quite one of them. You sleep in a servant's room, but your task is wrapped in velvet and importance. You carry the household's air in your arms. You touch the future. And for that, they watch you carefully. When the lady speaks to you, her voice trembles on the edge of courtesy. She smiles, but it rarely reaches her eyes. You recognize it as a performance, the same one you give the child when your heart isn't in it. She doesn't speak of her failure to nurse, nor of the doctors who visited before you arrived, nor the hours she likely spent trying and failing before someone told her to stop. That silence is part of the contract. 2. You will not ask. She will not confess. And so, you orbit one another. 2 moons around the same sun, the baby, who does not know the difference yet between love and nourishment. You wonder when they will learn. Once, you dream you're back home, your real home, where your child is still small, where the blanket you wove yourself still smells of wood smoke and milk. In the dream, you're singing. The tune is familiar, but wrong, too slow, or too low, or in a language you don't remember learning, but the baby understands it. They smile, toothless and trusting. Then the dream shifts. The room changes into stone. The light dims, and you're holding someone else's child. You wake up with your arms empty, and it takes you too long to remember which child belongs to which memory. There are rules no one writes down, but everyone follows. Do not linger after feeding. Do not speak too warmly of the baby. Do not laugh too loudly. Do not enter the solar, even if invited by a child who can barely speak. Do not write letters unless asked to. Do not expect any to arrive. Do not ask how long your stay will be. Do not ask when you'll be paid. Do not ask about your own child, even when the ache behind your ribs becomes unbearable. You break only one of these rules. You ask the steward when you may send a message home. He sighs, says something about the road being unsafe, about priorities, about timing. You nod, but later that night, you sneak a scrap of parchment from the maid's chamber and begin to write. You do not say where you are. You only say, I hope you are warm. I hope they let you sleep. I hope your arms still reach for mine. You hide the letter in your satchel, knowing it may never leave with you. But you needed to say it. That, too, is part of the contract. Children do not sign contracts, but they enforce them. With tiny hands, with milk-drunk smiles, with the way their weight settles on your hip and makes you forget what time it is. They do not know who you are. They will never remember your name. But for now, you are everything. You become expert in the micro-routines, the cradle's soft squeak, the exact number of rocks before sleep, the way to hum without waking the sleeping nurse. You know which herbs soothe colic, which linens chafe their neck, which corners of the nursery catch cold first in autumn. You begin to lose the shape of your own life. Your own child becomes a shadow, not for lack of love, but for lack of space in your aching heart. It is a cruel thing how the body can adjust, how a mother can be carved in half and still stand upright. One morning, the baby is sick, not gravely, a mild fever, the nurse says, but the household turns on its edge. The lady's eyes are wide, The steward mutters curses beneath his breath. You are asked a dozen times what the baby ate, when they last slept, whether you'd noticed any changes. You answer with precision, but something changes in their gaze. They look at you differently now, with suspicion, as if you could have given this child more than nourishment, as if something inside you might have been unclean. It passes. The fever breaks by nightfall, but the seed of doubt has already grown. You feel it in the way the maid no longer hands you fresh linens with a smile, in the way the cook sets your bowl apart from the rest, in how the lady keeps glancing at your hands. That night, you scrub your fingers raw with ash and salt. You do not know what you are trying to wash away. You learn, finally, the most painful clause in this unspoken contract, when the child begins to speak. Their first words will not be for you. They may reach for you, they may sob when you leave, but when they learn to name, it will be Mama for the one who watches from the doorway, not the one whose milk shaped their bones. And that is the moment the contract ends. Not with dismissal, not with farewell, but with a name you were never meant to keep. The child speaks, and you disappear. You rarely said the name aloud. It lived in your chest, nested under the breastbone where grief curls, tight and quiet. A single name your baby's small and round and soft, like their face in the early days when milk came without demand and your arms knew only one weight. You didn't have time to weep the day you left. The midwife arrived early, bundled in scarves, smelling of camphor and mud, and the woman beside her, the one who made the offer, didn't speak cruelly, just practically. "There's a place," she said, "a house that needs you." The words settled heavily, not like a gift, not like a command, more like the shift in weather before it rains inevitable, impersonal. You looked down at your baby, not yet crawling, not yet babbling, still so helpless in the rawness of their first months. They blinked up at you with eyes that hadn't learned fear or language, but knew the shape of your breath and the rhythm of your heart. How do you explain to a child that you are leaving, not because you want to, but because milk doesn't feed itself, that love does not pay for bread, and loyalty cannot be poured into a bowl? You wrapped them in the cleanest cloth you had, whispered a blessing you barely remembered from childhood, tucked your own scarf into their basket, the one that still smelled of you. And then you stood half a mother, half a ghost, and left the room that would remember your warmth longer than they would. It would have been easier if they had cried. But they didn't. They watched you go with that strange, open calm that only babies have, a gaze without judgment, without questions, without resistance. And that made it worse. You wanted them to reach out, to scream, to cling, anything to affirm that you were more than warmth and scent and rhythm, that you mattered. But they were still too new to understand what leaving meant. So you left. In the first house you served, there was a nurse who had done it 4 times, 4 babies of her own left behind in 4 villages. She didn't speak of them often, but one night, after too much cider and too little sleep, she said something you never forgot. "You leave," she murmured, staring into the hearth. "But something stays. The baby. They keep your shadow. On their cheek, on their breath. Sometimes. They cry for you at midnight, but no one knows why." You'd like to believe that in some unmeasurable way, your child still held a thread of you, that your milk, though given elsewhere, didn't unmake your motherhood, that absence didn't erase memory, even if the child had no words yet to form it. But belief is fragile when the cradle is empty. You tried, for a while, to hold them in your thoughts, not in the desperate way that bruises the soul, but gently, like a song hummed under your breath while folding linens. You imagined their growth in metaphors: sapling, candle, tide. You counted moons and tried to guess the day they might smile, the week they might sit, the hour they might speak. and you wondered what name they would call you when they did? If they did. But time is a thief. Not all at once that would be merciful. Time steals in increments the day you forget to count weeks, the night you hum a different tune to someone else's child, the moment you flinch when you hear a baby cry because you know it isn't yours. And then you stop imagining, not because you've stopped caring, but because it begins to hurt in places too deep to mend. There's no funeral for a bond stretched until it breaks. No burial for a mother's presence when the child no longer feels it. There is only the ache that fills its shape. You were promised the right to send letters. No one promised they'd arrive. You wrote anyway, not often. The ink was hard to come by, and paper was rationed like sugar. But you found scraps, the corners of laundry lists, the back of a discarded sermon, and in tiny, careful script, you wrote things no child could read, but that you needed to say. I miss your smell after rain. Did your cough go away? Does grandmother still hum in her sleep? Sometimes you included little drawings, a stick figure with curls, a spoon, a sheep with far too many legs. You signed them only with your first initial, because the steward once warned you, too much sentiment travels poorly. It slows the horse. So you sent only the essentials, folded into fabric bundles, hidden in bread baskets, slipped into the hems of other servants' satchels. You do not know if a single one ever arrived. The child in your care begins to teeth. They cry more now, gnawing at wooden beads and your knuckles. The lady of the house winces when the child fusses and withdraws into her embroidery. You're the one who holds them, rocking, always rocking. Their weight is different now, more muscle than mush. Their scent changes to less milk, more breath. And in quiet moments, you sometimes forget whose child this is. Not because you believe they are yours, but because your arms have not held your own in months, and the body does not care about names or titles. It only responds to touch. It's the cruelty of maternal instinct that it adapts to what's present, even if your soul does not. You feel the change most acutely when the housekeeper remarks one evening, "You're so calm with them, like they're yours." You smile, you nod. You do not say what you are thinking. They were never mine, and neither is this one. But both were held by the same hands, and that confuses the heart. One winter night, as frost veins the window and the hearth burns low, the steward brings news. Your child has been weaned. You ask if they are well. He shrugs. They're not dead, if that's what you mean. It's not what you meant. But you say nothing more. You are allowed one visit home in spring, 3 days. It takes nearly 2 to walk there. You arrive at dusk. The fields are muddy and the village smaller than memory, familiar and yet too distant, like a song you once knew all the words to, now half forgotten. They greet you with politeness. Your sister washes your feet. The neighbor's boy offers you stew, but something in their eyes says what their mouths won't. You're not one of them anymore. You ask to see your child. They point to the cottage. You stand in the doorway and watch. They are bigger now, standing, wobbling, holding a wooden spoon like a scepter. Their hair is darker than you remember, their nose less yours, more someone else's. They look up. Your heart races. They do not reach for you. They squint, then turn away. You try not to cry, but it happens anyway, silently, inwardly. The kind of crying that doesn't show on your face, but soaks everything inside. You are told they've been well cared for, that your aunt took them in after the cough passed, that they eat fine, sleep through most nights. You say thank you. You say nothing else, because there is nothing else to say. Not when the child no longer smells like your skin, not when they don't recognize your voice, not when they giggle for someone else's lullaby. On the last night, before you leave again, you sit outside the cottage alone. The stars are thick. the ground is cold, and your back aches from walking and rocking and weeping in silence. You remember the first night you ever held them, how small their fist was, how their breath tickled your collarbone, how you swore in some secret part of yourself that you'd always protect them. You did, in your own way. You fed others so they could be fed. You gave warmth to strangers so your own could stay sheltered. You left so they might stay. It is not the kind of love poets write about, but it is real. And it hurts just the same. The morning you leave again, your child is still asleep. You do not wake them. You leave no letter. You take nothing except the scent of wood smoke and the memory of soft curls. When you arrive back at the manor, the baby you nurse has cut a new tooth. You do not flinch when they bite. You barely notice at all. There is a strange quiet in the great houses, one that doesn't belong to silence but to forgetting, a quiet that grows not from stillness but from repetition. The soft rhythm of footsteps tracing the same stone corridors, the same pale rugs, the same dimly lit nursery chambers, where the air always smells of warmed linen, and something faintly sweet lavender perhaps, or powdered milk. You come to know these spaces intimately, not as a guest, not as their mistress, but as the invisible breath behind what keeps them whole. You do not open the doors, yet they swing before you. You do not sit at the table, yet you are up before the cook to ensure the child wakes calm. You do not draw their portrait, yet your arms shape the posture that someday holds their head upright. You are everywhere and nowhere a presence required, but not remembered. Each morning begins the same. A bell chimes softly from the hallway. You rise, already dressed. You prepare yourself not with cosmetics, not with a lady's adornment, but with the rituals of someone who must be forgotten once the use is complete. You wash quickly, pin your hair back, press your hands together to stop them from trembling in the cold. Your breasts ache already, swollen with milk not for your child. You hum something under your breath, not for joy, but to drown out the strange, hollow beat beneath your ribs. The child is not yet awake when you arrive. You know better than to be seen waiting. You settle yourself into the corner chair, worn smooth by habit, a blanket folded across your lap to absorb the spill that might stain the nursery cushion. When the nursemaid brings the infant, still swaddled and blinking at the new light, you do not speak. You reach, and the child turns its face instinctively, nuzzling toward you as if you were the first thing it ever knew. And perhaps, in some ways, you are. They will not remember this the way their body curls against yours, the way their fist grasps the edge of your apron, the way their lips seek you blindly, as if the world begins and ends at the rhythm of your breath. But you will. You remember all of them. Every child who ever nursed from you has left a name not on your tongue, but in the hollows of your spine, the curve of your shoulder, the softened sag of your abdomen that never quite returned to itself. You feed them gently, rhythmically. You do not rush. You cannot afford to be harsh. Not with this one, not with any. Their family's future rests in the folds of your lap. The child must thrive. Their limbs must plumpen. Their cheeks must flush with life. You are the breath that will fill their lungs with laughter, the strength that will fill their bones for running. You are the body that ensures their survival, and yet you are not allowed to be part of their story. The lady of the house arrives sometimes, drawn by curiosity or expectation. She enters the nursery like a ghost, wrapped in lace, pale, quiet, distant. Her gaze rarely meets yours. Instead, she stares at the child, and sometimes, at the child feeding at your breast. Something unreadable lives in her eyes, not quite envy, not quite shame, not quite affection. Perhaps it is all of them, blurred together in the way only a woman denied her own milk can understand. She might ask a question, coolly, like checking the weather. Has the baby taken well? Are they gaining? Has the coughing stopped? You answer with a nod or a phrase, brief and respectful. You do not say what you wish, that the child is growing well because of your sleep lost, your bones aching, your nipples raw and chapped. That each day you give your body without hesitation, and each night you wrap yourself tightly to prevent the letdown that comes from hearing another baby cry somewhere distant in the manor halls. Sometimes the lady speaks of future plans, how the child will study, which tutors will come, how fine their education will be, what inheritance awaits. You listen silently. These things have nothing to do with you, and everything. You are the one who gave them breath, but someone else will teach them to speak. You are the one who gave them strength, but someone else will take their hand when they walk for the first time. You are the first warmth they ever knew, but someone else will receive their gratitude. This is the shape of your life, to build the body of another's legacy and vanish before your name can be sewn into the hem. As months pass, the child begins to coo. Their sounds are not words, not yet, but they carry recognition. They smile at your voice. They laugh when you make faces. They reach for you without hesitation, fingers spread wide in blind trust. Sometimes they say, "Mom," the first shape of a word that might mean mama, though everyone knows it will not be you. The other servants tease you gently. They think you're their mother, one says. Another smiles and adds, "Maybe you are, for now." You say nothing, because the truth is sharper than teasing. For now, you are, entirely, physically, emotionally. You are the rhythm they sleep by, the scent they return to, the skin they trust. You are the hands that cradle them through fever, the lips that murmur lullabies when the candle gutters, the arms that do not tremble no matter how many hours you've been awake. And yet, that for now is a knife with no handle, because one day, the real mother, the one with the name, the rights, the portrait in the hall, will decide the child is old enough to no longer need you. And when that day comes, your presence will become a discomfort, a reminder, an inconvenience. The nursery changes as the child grows. More light, new toys, a polished cradle swapped for a toddler's bed. The nursemaid is replaced by a governess. The feeding shifts from breast to spoon. You are asked to stand further back, then not to come at all unless summoned. Eventually, not to be seen during the child's waking hours. But still, when the child wakes at night, crying with a heat in their forehead or fear in their throat, they call for you. Not by name, you were never given one, not one they were allowed to use, but by sound. A tone only you understand. You rise from your straw pallet below the stairs and pad quietly through the corridor. You soothe them with your hum. You place your cool hand against their cheek. You whisper nonsense words, like wind and lullaby and sleep. They always settle, and in the dark, before you step away, sometimes they reach up groggy, half dreaming, and pat your face with their small, damp palm, a gesture of unfiltered love. You wish you could keep just that, bottle it, press it like a flower between pages, because you know how easily it fades. Your name is not written in the child's record. When guests come, you are not introduced. When the family hosts celebrations, your face is behind the curtain. When they pose for portraits, you are folding linens in the lower hall. Once, when the child was 3, you saw them gazing at a portrait in the gallery. It was their father, painted in youth. You heard them ask the footman, "Who is that man?" And later, you heard them ask, "Who fed me when I was little?" The footman paused, thoughtful. "Your nurse, I think, or your mother, or someone." They nodded, content. You said nothing. You are not part of the story they tell, not in the bedtime legends, not in the family lineage, not in the heirlooms passed down. The cup they once gnawed as an infant is kept in a velvet box. The bonnet they wore on their first name day is preserved in lace, but the woman who held them through 5 fevers is not remembered. This is the trade, not just of milk, but of self. You gave the future a body, and in return, you became a shadow. Not because you failed to matter, but because your mattering was never meant to leave a mark. They are growing now. You notice it first, not in their height or speech, but in the absence. The weight of their body, once curled into your lap like a folded blanket, now resists resting there. Their limbs push outward, restless with a hunger not of the belly but of the world. They wiggle, stretch, reach toward windows and corners and high-backed chairs anywhere but you. They no longer need to be cradled to fall asleep. They no longer seek your skin in the middle of the night. When they cry, it is less often from fear and more from not getting their way. And when they laugh, it is for others, the governess, the tutor, the lady with her stiff perfume and carefully rehearsed affection. You are still nearby, of course, but you have begun to dim. Once you were milk and warmth and heartbeat. Now you are shadow and fabric and rules. The child no longer remembers your scent. Their nose wrinkles when you lean in too close. You notice how their cheek turns away, not cruelly, but casually. The way one moves past an old curtain or a door left ajar. Your touch, once home, is now a hallway they pass through on their way elsewhere. And yet you are still here. Your body remains, though it shrinks in both presence and mass. Your breasts, no longer full, return to softness. The ache that used to build each morning has faded. Your hips, once wide with milk fat, now taper. Your cheeks hollow, not from age, but from the silent reduction of being less necessary each day. Meals are smaller, sleep is lighter. The corners of your mouth turn downward, not in sorrow, but in weariness. You are not grieving a death, but a retreat, the kind where no one announces the end, and yet everything has already left. You watch the child being fitted for new shoes. They no longer sit upon your knee, but stand tall beside a noblewoman's mirror. Their tunic is embroidered now, their hair oiled. They hold a wooden horse, a gift you did not give, and smile with a mouth full of new teeth that have never bitten your skin. And you stand at the edge of the room, hands folded, breath slow. There is no ceremony for this transition, no bell to mark your irrelevance. It simply arrives, like dusk, creeping over the room while everyone continues on, unaware that the light has changed. You try not to feel it, the shrinking. It is not something you can protest, not something anyone sees. The other women, the cooks, the laundresses still nod when you pass, but the weight behind their nods is different now. There is a soft pity there, the kind people offer to those who have already been replaced, but haven't yet been told. No one says anything. They simply begin speaking about things you are no longer a part of. The new nursemaid has such soft hands, someone says. The child laughed with the tutor all morning. The lady's sister wants to visit the nursery next week. You hear it all, standing behind a door, tying your apron, folding the cloth for your room. You are no longer addressed. Your presence is now assumed, not requested. The child still knows your name, but they use it less. They do not shout for you across rooms. They no longer run into your skirt when frightened. Their tears fall more privately, soothed by others. One afternoon, you are asked to help clean the winter linens. It is not a punishment, not quite, but a sign. You are being shifted sideways, gently, without offense. The child is growing, and you, they say, are needed elsewhere. You nod, of course, of course. You do not cry, not then. But at night, when the manor grows quiet and the lamps are put out, you sit alone in the laundry alcove, your hands red from scrubbing soap into sheets you did not sleep in. And you think of the first moment that child latched onto your breast, how their tiny mouth had opened, unfamiliar, frantic, how your body had responded with pain and sweetness all at once, how you had wept not from joy, not from sadness, but from the sensation of becoming useful in a way that left no room for identity. That night, you press your palm to your chest and find it empty, not dry, exactly, but closed. Your milk no longer flows without summons. Your body no longer prepares before the bell. The rhythm is broken, not shattered, but softened into quiet refusal. You begin to forget how it felt to be needed in that way, and with that forgetting, something inside you folds inward. Others notice before you do. The kitchen girl asks if you're eating less. The stable boy says your eyes look hollow. The head housekeeper mutters that perhaps you've become too serious. These observations do not comfort. They confirm. You are becoming invisible. Not from cruelty, simply from time. Time has taken the curve of your back and bent it. Has taken the fullness of your role and drained it like the last drops from a basin. And there is no one to refill it, not unless a new child arrives. And even then, perhaps they will choose another nurse, a younger one, a quieter one who has not already fed too many names she was never allowed to keep. Your usefulness has an expiration date, but no one tells you when it comes. You only feel it, in the way your footsteps echo more than before, in the way the other servants speak in lower voices when you enter, in the way the child, now toddling, passes you in the hallway and does not stop. You pause, hoping they will reach up. They do not. They are not unkind. They are simply occupied. That is what growing means for them. It is expansion. For you, it is subtraction. You try to remember your own child. You do, sometimes, in the early hours, when your bones ache and the fire has gone out. You let your mind drift to the small, soot-faced baby you left with your sister in the village beyond the hills. You wonder how tall they've grown, whether they took their first steps in the same season this child did, whether they reach now for someone else's hand, mistaking it for yours. You once sent coin back with a merchant. You heard they bought shoes. You heard there was a cold winter, and your sister burned half the furniture to keep warm. You try not to think about what that means. You tell yourself your work is worth it. You are feeding the future. But the future grows so fast and forgets even faster. And meanwhile, you grow small. Not because you are fading, but because no one is looking closely enough to see you stay. You start wearing darker clothes, not from grief, from practicality. The lighter ones show every stain, every spill, every sign of usefulness, and you are tired of proving your usefulness. Your voice changes too. You speak less, not because you have nothing to say, because you know no one listens the way they used to. You are no longer the woman who saved the child from colic, no longer the woman who stayed up through 3 nights with a fevered brow pressed against hers. You are not praised anymore, only expected. And even that will fade. The child has a new fascination now, a little dog, gifted by an uncle. It follows them through the corridors. The child speaks to it with warmth, strokes its ears, cradles it in their arms. You try not to feel the echo, but you remember holding them the same way. One evening, the dog gets sick. The child cries and cries. No one can console them. You are called again, not by name, but by urgency. You arrive, and the child flings themselves into your arms, heavy now, longer, more solid than you remembered. You hold them as they sob, and for a moment, just one moment, they forget the growing and you forget the shrinking. You rock them gently. They do not say thank you. They do not need to. but in the quiet afterward, as they sleep against your chest like they once did, you close your eyes and feel something settle inside you. You have not disappeared. You have only become the silence beneath the story. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough for now. They never gave you parchment, never handed you ink or sealed letters with your name on them. You were not the sort of woman who wrote things down, not the sort who was expected to have thoughts that might outlive the moment they formed. And yet you began to write anyway, not with pen, but with thread, not in sentences, but in stitches. It started as habit, then it became something else entirely. The workrooms were dim, lit by slanted sunlight that slipped through latticed shutters and fell across bolts of linen and coarse wool. The air was thick with the scent of wax, damp straw, and drying milk. Other women came and went, chatting of butter and boys, of kitchen rumors and the dull ache of chores. You remained quiet, your hands constantly in motion, while the others hemmed sleeves and mended aprons. Your needle traced curves that did not quite belong to any pattern, little arcs in the seam, tiny crosses hidden near the collar, symbols only you understood, and even you didn't fully know what they meant at first. They were not letters, not exactly, not the alphabet taught to noble daughters, not the markings of scripture or record, but you placed them where a child's hand might brush against them, in the inner hem of a christening gown, beneath the fold of a sleeve that would never be turned up, a secret, a breath caught in thread. Each stitch said something you could not say aloud. The first was for the baby who had laughed for you, only you, when no one else could stop her tears. You stitched a spiral at the base of her sleeve, a soft swirl of pale green cotton into a place no one would see. It wasn't her name, but it meant her. It meant that moment, that laugh, the way her chubby hand had curled around your finger like a vine that refused to let go. It was the only kind of legacy you were allowed. No one asked why your seams took longer. No one noticed the way your fingers hovered an extra beat before pulling the needle through. But you began to feel it, the growing garden of quiet messages, tucked into garments that would be outgrown in months, lost in the trunks of noble closets, or passed down to cousins and heirs who would never know you were there at all. Still, you stitched, because you needed somewhere to keep the parts of yourself that were not permitted to exist. There were rules about emotion, not the ones written down in ledgers or chiseled into stone, but the spoken softly kind. A wet nurse was not to become too close. A wet nurse was not to interfere with parenting. A wet nurse was not to cry when the child was moved to a different room, or when the noble woman decided it was time to wean and dismissed you with thanks that did not reach the eyes. You were to step back, to fold your hands, to curtsy, to leave behind not only the milk, but the softness of your body, the warmth of your presence, the imprint of your care. But no one could tell you not to sew. So you stitched your goodbyes. You stitched them into the bonnets you wrapped around soft skulls, into the sleeves that carried children's arms as they reached for someone else, into the bands of sashes tied too tightly around the middles of a small, noble torsos being trained to stand still and speak less, a curved loop for a child who had once fallen asleep against your chest, a straight line for one who had slapped your breast and laughed, a broken stitch for the baby who would not take your milk and died before the winter passed. You could not keep their names. They were not yours to remember. But you remembered anyway. You remembered through the rhythm of the needle, in, out, pull, knot. It became a kind of music that only your fingers could hear, a song no one else would ever hum. You embroidered grief. You hemmed memory. The girl in the bedchamber across the hall began to notice. She was no one of consequence, the younger sister of a second wife, sent to live in the manor for a season to avoid scandal, or so the whispers said. She was quiet, like you, and had long fingers that trembled slightly when she poured tea. Once, while you worked beside the fire, mending a shift the child had torn, she came closer and asked what you were doing. You told her you were mending, nothing more, but her eyes were sharp. "That's not just mending," she said, gesturing to the green swirl. "That's a sign." You shrugged. You said it helped you concentrate. She said nothing else, but from then on, she watched you whenever you worked. Her gaze made your skin itch, not in fear, but in something harder to name. A recognition, perhaps, a seeing. You were not used to being seen. One evening, she handed you a ribbon. "It's from the lady's drawer," she whispered. "Stained with rouge. She won't miss it." You should have returned it. Instead, you cut it into threads and stitched the color into the lining of the child's winter cloak, a flash of red no one would ever notice. From then on, the girl left you bits of broken bead, a fallen hairpin, a dried petal. You added them all to your embroidery. She never asked what they meant. You never told her. But sometimes, when you passed in the corridor, she would nod just once, and that was enough. There were dangers to this. Once, a head housekeeper noticed your handiwork and frowned. "What is that?" she asked, squinting at the cuff of a nursery smock. "It's not part of the pattern." You opened your mouth to explain, to lie, to excuse, but the words would not come. The housekeeper narrowed her eyes. "Do not get too clever," she said. "You're not here to be remembered." And she was right. But that didn't mean you could be erased completely. So you began hiding the stitches better, smaller, subtler, pale thread on pale cloth, curves that vanished into pleats, marks that could be dismissed as flaws. You became careful and clever and quiet. You became what they feared, a memory with no record. Years later, and you could feel the years, each one bending your spine a little more, thinning the skin around your knuckles. You were called again to a different house, a new family, a child who screamed at every voice but yours. You packed what little you owned, a small comb, a thread bundle, 2 folded letters you had never dared send, and a handkerchief stitched with 4 green spirals. You didn't know which children they belonged to anymore, but you kept them, because someone had to. The new household was colder, sharper. The lady was young and impatient. The servants rotated like door hinges, always someone new. But the child, a pale little boy with fevered eyes, held your finger the moment you touched him. And so you stayed. And you stitched. He never saw the gold thread you hid along the hem of his nightshirt, never noticed the pale lavender tucked into the seams of his cloak. But you did. And for a while, that was enough. You no longer told yourself you were doing it for them. You were doing it for you, to leave something behind in a world where women like you left nothing but footprints on stone floors and indentations on straw pallets. One day, decades later, a young noblewoman entered the same manor where you had once worked. She carried a satchel of old garments for donation. Her daughter had outgrown them. Some were heirlooms, passed down through cousins and wet nurses and cribs now broken. As she handed over a faded christening gown, she paused. "What's this?" she asked, fingering a small, uneven swirl of green thread inside the cuff. The laundress shook her head. "Old flaw, I suppose. From a wet nurse. They used to be strange women. Some of them." The noblewoman didn't reply, but she kept the gown. She pressed it flat against her lap, studied the thread, and wondered who had held the child once, wrapped in that cloth. Who had watched the baby's chest rise and fall in sleep? Who had stitched something so soft and strange into a place meant never to be seen? And for one moment, the woman felt something quiet and warm, not understanding, but a shadow of it. That was all you had ever hoped for. You didn't plan to care. That was the first unspoken rule, the one no one needed to write down. Because every woman in your position learned it quickly or learned it harshly. Do not let your heart wander where your body is rented. You give the milk, the hands, the warmth, but you do not give the soul. You must not. And yet you did. You had done it before, or something like it. A gentle fondness, a hush of concern. But this was different. It wasn't just her tiny breath fluttering in your arms, or the slow press of her head into your chest while she slept. It was the way she looked at you, not like the others had not, as a source of food or the blurred outline of a servant, but as something permanent, something whole. When she saw you, her whole face softened, as if the world itself made more sense in your presence. You knew what that look meant. You had once seen it in your own child's face. And that was the danger. You didn't notice the moment affection crossed the threshold. It wasn't a sudden fall. It was a gradual, treacherous slide. A pause too long at her cradle. A soft hum you whispered each night as she settled. The way your body turned toward her cry faster than toward anyone else's voice. The way you stopped counting the days until your contract ended. Other servants noticed first. One made a joke that wasn't kind, something about how the nurse thinks she's the mother now. You laughed with them. That's what you were supposed to do. But inside, your stomach sank like a stone dropped into a deep well. You had always known the line, and now you had crossed it. The lady of the house began to watch you. At first, it was in passing a glance over a cup, a pause in conversation. Then it became something else. She began appearing without reason, standing in doorways, asking questions that didn't need answers, watching you, always watching. Not the child, you, and you knew then that she had seen it too, the way the girl reached for you before anyone else, the way she cried when you left the room, the way her eyes tracked you as if afraid you'd disappear. The noble woman said nothing, not for days. Then one morning, she asked you to come to the drawing room, alone. You wiped your hands on your apron, smoothed your sleeves. You knew what was coming, and yet, part of you still hoped. She didn't sit. Neither did you. She looked at you for a long time, long enough that you lowered your gaze, long enough that your heartbeat rose to your ears. "She's grown too fond of you," she said. You nodded, though you weren't sure what else you could have done. "She cries when I hold her." You kept your eyes down. "She looks for you first." You nodded again, slower. "I think it's best you go." Your breath stopped. Not sharply, just a slow deflation, like a roof giving way under snow. You didn't ask when. You didn't plead. You curtsied, your mouth dry. You said the only words aloud. "Yes, my lady." They let you stay one more night. You weren't supposed to see the child again, but you did. Slipped into the nursery after the house had dimmed and the lamps were low. She was asleep, her cheeks flushed, her fist curled against her chin. You knelt beside the cradle. You didn't cry. You just watched her breathe. And then, quietly, you reached into your pocket and took out a ribbon, the one she had once tugged loose from your braid with giggling fingers. You tied it gently around the edge of her blanket, near the part where her thumb always nestled, not where anyone would notice, just close enough that if she stirred in her sleep, her fingers might find it, and maybe remember you, even if she couldn't name what was missing. You didn't say goodbye. You just walked out of the room and let the door close softly behind you. The next morning, you were gone before the household stirred. There was no carriage, no fanfare, just a coin pressed into your palm and a nod from the steward. You walked down the gravel path with the sun barely lifting above the hedgerows. Your bag was light. Your chest was not. You told yourself you'd been foolish, that you knew better, that the warmth you'd felt was not yours to keep. You reminded yourself that she would forget you soon. Children always did. And yet, every few steps, your hand drifted to your chest, to the spot where her small head used to rest. You imagined you could still feel the weight of her. By the time you reached the village, your shoulders had begun to shake, not from cold, from the ache of holding something in for too long. You sat on a stone wall, far from anyone, and let the grief move through you like a silent tide. You found another place, eventually. You always did. Another house, another family, another child. Though this one was different, thinner, fussier, less quick to smile. You did your duty. You gave the milk. You stayed quiet. You did not hum. You did not let your fingers linger. You did not meet the child's eyes for too long. You learned. You hardened. You stitched less. You remembered less. But you were never the same. Something in you had shifted. You had given something too deep, too bright, and it had been taken without ceremony, without thanks, without acknowledgement that it was ever yours. That was the punishment. Not dismissal, not shame, not even gossip. It was the quiet erasure of your affection, the suggestion that what you felt had no name, and therefore no right to remain. And yet it remained anyway. Years passed. One spring, in a market town you'd never seen before, you saw a girl, tall, upright, hair the color of candle smoke. She walked with the stride of someone trained in music and posture. Her gown was expensive but simple, her gloves unscuffed. She paused at a fruit stall, tilting her head at the apples. Something about the way she held her hands made your breath catch. You couldn't move. And then she turned, her face older, leaner, shaped by privilege and sun and time, held a flash of something familiar, a memory hidden behind the years. She looked past you and walked on. She didn't recognize you. Of course not. But you recognized her, and for a moment, you saw something glinting from the corner of her cloak. A ribbon. Pale blue. A little frayed. The same shade you remembered tying to the edge of a cradle blanket. Long ago, she had kept it, maybe not knowing why, maybe not knowing it was ever yours, but she had kept it. And somehow, that was enough. They said it started with a cough, the kind of sound a child makes when the weather turns damp. When the nights grow longer than the daylight, and the sheets in a stone-walled nursery hold the chill of dawn. The baby coughed once, twice, then more. The servants exchanged glances, fetched the linen, lit another fire. You wiped her lips with the edge of your sleeve, careful, quiet, your body already knowing what it meant when a child this small started to wheeze in the throat. The physician came 2 days later, not because they were careless, but because they didn't want to spend more than they needed to. He was an old man who smelled of rosemary and ash, and he looked into the infant's mouth like he was peering through a keyhole in a locked door. He said nothing to you, he never did, but you watched the lady of the house hover near the physician's sleeve, whispering things she hadn't whispered before, about your color, your weight, your presence. Had you not seemed tired lately? Was the child not restless in your arms? Had your milk not seemed different? The physician left a list of herbs and a pouch of doubt, and that's how it began. Not with accusation, but with a question, a glance that lingered a beat too long, a whisper traded between women at the edge of the stairwell. You heard your name, not spoken but smudged, blurred under breath, softened by the fear of being overheard. Wet nurses from the marshes. She's been here too long. I heard she doesn't bleed anymore. You had seen it before, not often, but enough to know that once it began, it did not stop easily. They didn't call it a curse, not at first. They called it imbalance. Humors gone sour, milk that flowed too long, too thick. too full of sorrow. Some whispered that the child grew weaker with every feeding, that no Christian baby should be fed by a woman who did not speak of her own God often enough, that too much grief curdled the body, that it made the milk unclean. The kitchen girl stopped sitting beside you. The steward stopped making eye contact. Even the cat that used to curl against your skirts now chose a colder corner. You knew the feeling. It wasn't the heat of a fire that surrounds you, it was the cold of its absence. The way space opens around you in rooms that used to be crowded. The way silence wraps itself around your name like a noose made of nothing. They started watching the child too closely. Every twitch, every cry, every flutter of her eyelids became a clue. If she slept too long, they worried. If she cried too soon, they wondered. They measured her stools, her weight, the way her skin flushed when she cried. And always, they came back to one thing: the milk. Your milk. It had been praised before. Rich, thick, generous enough to feed two. That's why they'd taken you on. That's why they'd paid more than usual. You had been the miracle nurse once, the one who saved a noble child born too small, too blue. But memory is short when fear arrives. And fear had arrived. Quietly, creeping like a shadow up the walls of the nursery. Someone said the word witch, not to your face, never to your face, but the word lived in the linen, in the wash basin, in the half-finished prayers near the crib. Witch's milk. They used to say it was the milk of women who had made a pact, women whose breasts never dried because they fed something else, not just babies, something dark, something old. It was nonsense, of course, you knew that. But sense doesn't matter when someone is afraid of what they can't see. They weren't judging your deeds. They were judging your silence, your distance, the way your eyes stayed too long on a crying child, the way you didn't cross yourself at meals. You began to dread the feeding hour. What had once been routine, almost sacred, now felt like a trial. You felt their eyes behind you as you latched the child. You felt the heat of their suspicion with every swallow. You tried to act normal. Smile. Hum a tune. Keep your hands steady. But you could feel the tremor under your skin, the ache of being weighed by people who never touched the burdens they handed you. And then, the child got worse. It wasn't your fault. The fever came from outside, a chill brought in by the older brother returning from lessons. A cough passed through the hands of a maidservant whose sister worked in the next village where illness was blooming like rot. But you knew the truth didn't matter. The child coughed blood one morning. That was the end. They didn't ask you to leave, not at first. They stopped asking you to enter. The nursery door was locked. The lady herself took over feeding with a bottle, clumsy and late. They said the child needed less stimulation. They said she was sensitive. But they didn't say what they meant. What they meant was, we no longer trust you. What they meant was, maybe the child will recover if she forgets your taste. You weren't dismissed. You were ignored, erased slowly, hour by hour. And still, you stayed, because your contract hadn't ended, because you had nowhere else to go, because you still hoped the child would open her eyes and look for you, and that would be enough to shatter the spell of doubt. But she didn't. She healed slowly, and she forgot quickly. By the time they allowed you near her again, weeks later, she turned away from your arms like they were made of stone. She wouldn't latch. She didn't cry. She just stared through you. You weren't the witch, but you were no longer the comfort either. One night, the cook brought you broth. She said nothing, just set the bowl down near your cot and turned to leave. But as she reached the doorway, she paused. "My aunt was a wet nurse too," she said. You looked up, surprised by the sound of a voice not laced with caution. "They blamed her too, when the baby died." You swallowed, the broth untouched in your hands. They never said the word straight out, the cook added. Just kept saying she was unnatural. What happened to her, you asked. She went home, and she never worked again. You didn't ask why. You already knew. Sometimes the shame didn't need to be enforced. It lived in the walls of your own village, in the stares of neighbors, in the silence of your own child, who couldn't understand why your return felt like abandonment. You came back changed, and that change was louder than truth. That spring, a letter came, from a noble woman 2 counties over. A new baby, a new need, a new contract. You accepted, because what else was there? But before you left, you stood once more at the door of the nursery. The child was sleeping. You didn't go inside, just watched her face, still soft and full and flushed with the health you had once given her, the health they no longer credited to you. You placed a piece of folded linen under the edge of the door, a handkerchief, embroidered, just one word, still alive, still grieving, still human, still not what they named you, still more than what they feared. Still, you stood at the edge of the village like a stranger, returning to land that once knew your footsteps. The hills hadn't moved. The path still curled between the same blackberry hedges. The well still echoed with the same winter frogs. But you had changed, and the land could tell. You walked slower now, not because you were tired, but because something in you feared arriving. There is a kind of dread in coming home when the child you left was still small enough to sleep on your chest, and the child you return to may no longer know the shape of your scent. You carried your bundle under one arm, tight cloth around a spare shift, and some coins in a pouch stitched into the hem. But the heaviest thing you carried was not the bundle. It was the milk that had long since dried, and the memory of having fed another baby through 100 silent midnights not yours, never yours. You had written 3 letters, each one shorter than the last, each one sent with coin for the wet nurse who'd stayed behind to care for your own. You never knew if she read them. You never knew if your baby saw them. But the coin always vanished from your messenger's hands, and that was proof enough that someone was still watching him. Your boy. The path grew narrower. A dog barked once from behind a gate. You passed old women hunched near a low wall, and they turned to watch you, not cruelly, not kindly, just uncertain, like they couldn't decide whether to say your name out loud or swallow it the way people swallow bad news quietly, and with superstition. At last, you came to the doorway of the cottage where he waited. The woman who answered it looked startled, not surprised, not angry, just unsure how to greet someone who had returned from a silence too long to measure. I told him you were coming, she said, voice cautious. I told him again this morning. You nodded. He was out back, playing. You stepped inside. The air smelled of ash and onion and soap. A boy's shirt too small now hung near the hearth to dry. A wooden horse lay on its side by the bench. You looked at these things, the way you'd once looked at the lace hems of noble cribs, careful not to touch what could unmake you. She called his name. He came in, running. Dirty feet, open mouth, a bruise darkening under one eye from a branch or a scuffle or something ordinary. The kind of wound that children collect like tokens from the world. He stopped when he saw you and stared. Not the way children stare when they're shy or sleepy or worn to be polite. No, this was the stare of someone looking through a glass pane. He knew you were there, but he didn't know why he should care. You opened your mouth to say his name, not loudly, not with tears, just softly the way you had whispered it to yourself in the corners of manor rooms when other children were suckling from your breast. The name you had sewn into your mind so that time could not fray it. He did not answer. He turned his head toward the other woman, just slightly, just enough. And you felt it. The shift, The realization that your name, your real name, had not been spoken to him for too long. He had not waited for you. He had learned to sleep without you, to be comforted by someone else's rhythm, someone else's knee to hide behind, someone else's hum when he was sick. And it was no one's fault, except that it was yours, the world's, the system that turned women into resources and children into heirs and love, into a thing that could be bartered and left behind. You stayed. Of course you stayed. There was nowhere else to go. You cooked again. Slowly at first, your hands awkward in a kitchen, where tools no longer obeyed your memory. You washed linens. You fetched water. You began to relearn the creak of the floorboard near the window, the shelf that tilted if you stacked too many bowls. You watched him from the corner of your eye, never asking him to come closer, just waiting. One night, he had a fever. The woman, tired, overwhelmed, asked you to sit beside him. You did? You wet the cloth with water and pressed it to his forehead. You told a story you thought you'd forgotten about a beetle that turned into a fish to escape the rain. He didn't say anything. He didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. That was enough. For now, spring came. You gardened side by side, not with joy, with necessity. His hands were quick and clumsy. Yours were slower now, but precise. You planted the same crops you had before: beets, onions, cabbages, but the soil felt new. Or maybe you did. Every turn of the earth seemed to loosen something that had hardened in you over the long absence. One morning, as he dug into the ground, he found a small jawbone of an animal. A fox, maybe a hare. He turned and held it up like a relic. His eyes searched yours for a reaction. You smiled gently. You found old teeth, you said. He grinned back. It was the first time you began to stitch again. Not for pay, just for peace. In the evenings, when the wind pressed against the door, you took out the cloth scraps you had saved. Pieces of things too torn to wear, but too dear to throw away. You stitched them together, not to make a blanket, just to keep your hands from unraveling. He asked what you were making. Something to remember, you said. Remember what? You looked at the thread, the red one, the one you'd once used to sew initials into linen that wasn't yours. Everything, you said. One night, months later, he fell asleep against your leg. You didn't move. You didn't even breathe deeply, because if you did, the spell might break. You knew he would not remember this when he woke. Not fully. He might remember the warmth, or the rhythm of your voice if you dared to sing, but not the shape of the moment. But it didn't matter. The forgetting that had happened before the forgetting of who you were had not been cruel. It had been survival. And now, the remembering, slow, wordless, stitched into days of nothingness, was a kind of grace. Others in the village watched, some with judgment, some with pity. But most said nothing. You had returned. That was all they needed to see. They didn't ask what you had done while away. They didn't ask whose child you had fed, or whose portraits hung in the homes where you'd walked barefoot on stone floors. They didn't care, or maybe they did, but had learned not to show it. You learned the same. He began to call you by your name again. Not mother, not yet. Just your name, spoken the way a child says the name of a creek, or a tree, or something that lives outside but always returns. And when winter came again, you prepared the fire. You fed it slowly. You held him closer than before. You did not speak of the year he had forgotten you, and he in kindness did not ask. The cradle was always someone else's. The key never turned in your own lock. You arrived by cart, by foot, sometimes on a mule, sometimes with blisters that hadn't healed from the last departure. Your life unfolded like a rented map, smoothed across a table for just a season, then folded again along creases, not of your choosing, and always. It was the child that anchored your stay, a child not yours, born of silk sheets and careful arrangements, whose lungs you were expected to fill and whose weight you were expected to double. A future heir, a fragile treasure, a need. You would arrive, and the mistress of the house, often pale, exhausted, untouched by the sun, would look at you not with welcome, but with calculation. Her eyes searched your body, not for beauty or warmth, but for functionality. Were you healthy? Was your skin clear? Did your breast look full enough to nourish what her body could not or would not provide? You never brought too much. A bundle at most, a scarf, a small wooden icon, a locket if you hadn't already sold it. Sometimes you carried a letter from the midwife who'd vouched for you. Sometimes you brought nothing but your name. And even that, after so many crossings, began to feel like something borrowed. The manner changed, but the ritual did not. You were given a bed in the attic or a cot near the kitchen. The child slept upstairs, surrounded by linen and silence, and you, the provider of life, remained one floor below. They called you by your first name. Never mistress, never madam. You were not staff, not family. Something in between, a vessel that arrived full and left empty, a lease on nurture. You were not allowed to linger when your usefulness waned, when the child grew teeth or weaned early, when the household staff changed, or a noble cousin offered another option. The message would come. Sometimes it was spoken kindly, like a farewell to a traveler. Other times, it was delivered in folded linens and coin tucked into the bottom of a satchel. But it always came. You learned to recognize the signs. The cook would stop talking to you while slicing carrots. The maid would begin wiping down your sleeping corner before you had even packed. The lady of the house would spend more time staring at the child and less at you. And sometimes, the child himself would stop reaching for you altogether, sensing in that strange, cruel way of infants that your scent belonged elsewhere now. You would leave without ceremony. There was never a farewell feast. No one asked you what the child liked most, or how he cried when the shutters clattered in the wind. No one thanked you for the fever nights, for the lost sleep, for the song you invented that made his hiccups pause. You passed your knowledge like air invisible, necessary, unclaimed. From manor to manor, your steps left no trail. The baby weight you'd once carried settled in your hips. The dreams you'd had of staying somewhere long enough to plant mint outside a door never returned. You began to stop asking names, not because you were cruel, but because you had learned that every name you learned would eventually forget yours. Your own children, if you had any, grew up motherless even while you lived. You sent back coin, cloth, sometimes dried fruit. You wrote brief letters if someone in the village could scribe for you. He grows well, I hope. You wrote, or I sing him the same lullaby. You told yourself these things because you needed them to be true. You imagined your boy sleeping soundly under the same sky. You imagined he would understand, that he would know his mother was not gone, but given. But you also knew what absence did to the memory of a face. How quickly love could become discomfort. How fast a familiar voice could become noise. Children do not wait in the way mothers do. You were replaced, not just once, many times. There was always another woman willing to take the work, another body. Younger maybe, softer still, not yet worn from the miles. You saw them sometimes as you passed on the road. One carried a baby close to her chest, swaddled against the wind. Her face held that same uncertainty. Yours had once worn the question of whether this time might be different, whether the family might be kind, whether she might get to stay longer. You never stopped to talk to her. You didn't need to. You had been her, and someday she would be you. At one house, They forgot your name entirely. The new mistress called you the woman who was here last spring. When a neighbor mentioned the name you'd carried since birth, she shrugged. That may have been her. You were a season, not even a memory, just warmth, borrowed and returned. Yet the children remembered you differently. You saw it sometimes in the way they looked at you when you visited by chance. Years later, one touched your hand and asked if you still hummed the song with the bird in it. Another ran to you before her governess pulled her back. You were not mother, but you were something. A softness that had brushed their earliest months. A shape in the dark that had once brought milk and calm. And even if they could not name you, their bodies remembered your presence the way vines remember the post they once clung to. Still, you left. Always, you left. You came to believe that maybe this was all you would ever do, arrive full, depart emptied. Maybe that was all womanhood meant in the end, a life of giving without roots, of being known in moments and forgotten in lists. Your body had been strong, then sore, then sagging. Your heart had been wide, then cracked, then stitched again in secret. There were nights, in the later years, when you stayed at no house. You slept in barns, sometimes with only the straw and a cat for company. You stopped bleeding, but the ache remained. You pressed your palm to your chest some nights to remind yourself that you still had one, not because it hurt, but because no one had touched it in so long that you needed to be sure it existed. The final child you fed was named after you, not out of honor. The mother hadn't known what to call her yet, and your name was convenient. A placeholder. That girl would grow up thinking it was hers alone, never knowing that it had been borrowed from the woman who sang her to sleep before she could hold a spoon. And when you left that last house, you took nothing, not even your name, because by then, even that had been given away. You walked back toward the village of your birth, older than your years. Not many recognized you. Some still did the baker's wife, who was now the baker. The old shepherd who once gave you milk on a cold morning. They nodded, polite, distant. You nodded back. You slept in your sister's room for a while. You helped in her kitchen. You did not say much. There was no need, because you had learned something by then. When you give everything milk, warmth, comfort, silence, the world remembers only the child who thrives, never the woman who bled herself dry. But sometimes, late at night, when a baby cried in the next cottage, you would turn in your sleep not from restlessness, but from memory. Your body still heard the call. Your soul still rose, aching, as if it might be needed again. And though no one called for you anymore, the ache remained. Because once, you were the first voice someone heard. And that is not a thing a woman forgets. She never spoke more than she had to. Her voice was mild, her eyes averted, her posture flawless, shaped by years of tutors, of enforced elegance, of knowing when to look and when to look away. But with you, she sometimes forgot the latter. In the stillness between feedings, when the candles burned low and the house sighed beneath its own wealth, you'd feel her watching. Not the baby, not the wet curls at the nape of his neck, or the tiny fingers curled around your shift. No, she watched you. The slope of your shoulder as you leaned forward, the way your chest rose with the rhythm of the child's suckling, the weary tenderness in your touch, the kind she herself could never quite summon without trembling. It wasn't jealousy, or if it was the kind that turned inward, a quiet shame she carried, not for what she lacked, but for how easily you gave what she could not. Her body had grown the child, yes, but yours had nourished him, fed him, soothed him, breathed into him a steadiness she had no name for. There was no name for the thing between you. It wasn't friendship, she would never let the line blur that far. It wasn't rivalry, you did not compete for affection, for status, for power. In her world, you were nothing. But in the room, in the moment, you were everything. A still point the infant circled like a sun. She was the mother in title. You were the one in skin. Sometimes, in the afternoons, when the child had drifted into a milk-heavy sleep, she would linger, her embroidery untouched, the thread forgotten in her lap, her eyes fixed not on the blanket or the lace, but on your hands, hands that had folded too many farewell letters, that had wrung themselves dry with grief and guilt and giving. She looked at them like they held a knowledge she'd never been taught. She had been raised to lead a household. You had been raised to survive one. There were moments rare, but unforgettable, when she looked at you with something close to fear, not of you, but of what you represented. The truth that softness could come from the dirt, that devotion didn't need diamonds, that motherhood, in its rawest form, had nothing to do with names or rings or dowries. Once, she walked in while you were humming. You hadn't heard her approach. The child had been fussy, and you were doing what you always did, singing low. No words, just a sound that held the shape of safety. You didn't stop. She didn't interrupt. She stood in the doorway with her hand on the carved frame, and for a breathless minute, it felt like the house itself was listening. She left without a word. But that evening, when the servants laid your supper in the side room, there was a folded cloth napkin beside the bowl, pressed in white. Not a grand gift, but a gesture. It happened again, days later. A shawl, left on your cot. Too fine to be yours, too plain to be hers. No note, no claim. You understood. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need acknowledgement. She needed in some deep, unspeakable way to see you, to see the person who held her child in the dark, who steadied his breath when he choked on a laugh or a sob, who bled milk while her own body held silence. You never spoke of it, not to her, not to the maid who noticed your new shawl, not even to the child, who would one day forget you entirely. Some things were too quiet for names. Some bonds existed only in the margins, too risky to be real, too real to be erased. But still, you remember the way her eyes lingered on your chest, not with lust, not even with envy, but with a kind of reverence, a slow, wordless recognition of what it means to hold life against your skin and know it isn't yours, of what it means to give with no hope of being remembered, of what it means to matter in the most invisible way. She returned to her silks. You returned to your corner. The child grew. The silence between you stretched like thread. But that look, that single, shattered moment when her gaze rested on your tired hands, as if they were relics, stayed, and you carried it, like you carried everything else, without complaint, without reward. Because in a life built on leaving, sometimes being seen even for a breath is the closest thing to being held. The coin never came first. It came last, if at all, and even then, it was rarely the gold they promised. They said you'd be paid. They said it would be fair. But what they meant was enough to leave with, enough to carry you to the next doorstep, the next child, the next season where your body would belong to another's need. You were paid in fabric, a bundle of linen tied in a frayed sash, a dress passed down from a cousin who had married well and no longer needed plain things, a second-hand shawl with a moth-bitten corner, once, a pair of shoes 2 sizes too small, their soles worn thin but still described as serviceable. They handed them over like charity, but they had taken everything from you like it was owed. You never asked for more. That would have made you troublesome. Wet nurses were supposed to be quiet, grateful, discreet, a body with no mouth, a mother with no child, a kindness that didn't leave stains. Sometimes they gave you a coin or two, pressed into your palm without meeting your eye, like a priest giving penance to a sinner. And the sin, always, was loving too much, staying too long, leaving with tears. No one wanted a wet nurse who wept. They wanted the kind who folded her hands and nodded, who left no trace except for a healthy child in an empty room. But the silence that was the real currency, they taught it to you in the first house. The lady didn't say it outright, but she didn't need to. You understood from the way she nodded once, sharply, when you bent your head, from the way the maid tightened her mouth when you asked about your own baby, miles away, from the way the man of the house never used your name. No one said, "Don't talk about what you see." They didn't have to. You saw everything. You saw the mistress sit alone after supper, rubbing her wrists like she could scrape the tired out of her bones. You saw the nanny flinch when the father raised his voice. You saw the baby's rashes that no one else seemed to notice until they bled. You saw the wine bottle tucked behind the heavy curtains. You saw the way one of the cousins, too old to still sleep in the nursery, lingered by the cradle for too long. And still, you said nothing, because they weren't paying you to speak. They were paying you to stay, and then just as swiftly to go. You learned to measure your worth not in money, but in what you were allowed to carry. A bolt of fabric, a jar of honey, a loaf of bread wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. These were your goodbye gifts. Symbols, not salaries. Tokens that said thank you for feeding our future. Now go before your presence stains the floor. No one asked if you had enough to reach the next village. No one asked where you would sleep that night. No one asked if your own child still remembered your voice. You walked away with your arms full, but your name hollowed. The fabric didn't smell like you. The silence did. At one house, they gave you a dress fine wool, dyed a dull green. You never wore it. You kept it folded in the bottom of your bundle, like proof that once you had mattered. Not enough to stay, not enough to write down, but enough to clothe. Sometimes, in the quiet between jobs, when you found a moment alone in a hayloft or behind the hedge of a quiet road, you would unfold that dress and touch the hem, just to remind yourself I was there. I did give. I did survive. You became skilled at folding silence. You folded it into the way you nodded when they dismissed you. You folded it into the stories you didn't tell when the village girls asked. You folded it into the lies you wrote home. They treated me kindly. The baby was strong. I was given everything I needed. But what you needed, truly, was never offered. You needed someone to say thank you for waking at midnight. Thank you for the cracked skin. Thank you for the warmth you gave even when no one gave it to you. Instead, you were offered fabric, a sleeve for a wound, a wrap for a breast that had stopped giving, a hand-me-down for a woman who had handed down everything. Years later, when you had nothing left but stories and your own thinning shawl, you'd meet other women like you in markets and roadside shelters. You recognized them by the tilt of their shoulders, the way they carried bundles close. You didn't need to ask. You had all worn the same silence. You had all walked away carrying the same kind of emptiness, the kind that looked, to others, like generosity. And when you sat together, knees drawn up, firelight dancing across old linen and tired skin, you touch your shawl and say, "They gave me this when the baby turned 1. Another would nod and say, "Mine came after the second fever." And then you would fall quiet again, not because there was nothing left to say, but because silence was the only language that had ever been respected. You were paid in fabric. You were paid in silence. And somehow, that had to be enough. You had done everything right. Woken before dawn to warm the room. Rocked him through coughing fits and hunger cries and the fussy little sadnesses that came from nowhere. You had wiped his mouth with the edge of your sleeve, whispered lullabies you didn't remember learning, and given him your body until your ribs showed and your joints ached. You had even stopped thinking about your own child by then. It hurt too much to wonder if she was warm, or if someone else was holding her wrong. So you poured everything into this child in silk blankets and gold thread bonnets, who smelled of rose water and milk, who did not look like you, but who, for a few quiet moments each day, made you forget your name. And then one morning, the house was silent in the wrong way. You felt it before you saw it. The hush of too many closed doors, the stillness of servants moving without speaking, the nursemaid's hands trembling as she passed you the basin. You knew. A mother always knows even when the child was never hers. The baby had gone cold in the night, not dramatically. No fevered screams or midnight calls, just a stillness that did not shift, a breath that never came back. You stood over the cradle and looked at the soft mouth you had kissed, the downy hair you had stroked back again and again, and something inside you went so still it never started again. They said you were not to blame. They said the physician had found no reason. They said these things happened. But they didn't look you in the eye when they said it. No one asked how long you had sat by the crib before knocking on the mistress's door. No one asked what lullaby you were humming when you realized his chest was no longer rising. No one asked what happened to the milk that still filled your breasts, heavy and useless, aching with betrayal. They did not look at you. You had lived in that house for nearly a year, woken in it, bled in it, prayed in it, and now, as grief painted the curtains gray, you became invisible, as if your love had died with him or worse, because of him. They moved quickly after that. The nursery was emptied before sunset. A different child's cry echoed from the wing the next morning, a cousin sent for from another branch of the family. The air must continue. The rooms must not stay too quiet. And you were given a half-week's bread, a coin folded into a handkerchief, and a bundle of clothes you hadn't worn in months. The lady met you at the stairs. She did not embrace you. She did not thank you. She said, "We will send for you if we need you again," and then walked away before your answer could fall. You did not cry, not because you weren't broken, but because you had no space left to break. You had used every tear on the child who had never been yours. Now, you had nothing but milk in a body that had no infant to feed. The pain was not sharp. It was dull, unceasing. Days later, on the road, you passed another woman cradling her baby. She looked up and nodded in greeting. You could not speak. The ache in your chest had nothing to do with muscle or skin. It was a memory pressing outward, trying to be let out. At night, you dreamed of small hands that never let go. You woke to silence and the sound of milk leaking onto straw. And still, no one looked at you, as if your sorrow was too ordinary to name, as if a wet nurse's love didn't count unless the child lived to remember it, as if you hadn't become a grave no one would mark. It began with the cold, not a sharp, violent frost, but a quiet one, the kind that seeps in under doorways and through the bones. The manor was warmer than the countryside. Yes, but not warm enough. Not for someone who lived in the servants' quarter with a window that didn't close fully. Not for someone who slept with their arms curled around aching ribs, the thin blanket barely reaching past her hips. You felt it in your chest first. Your milk no longer came as easily. The letdown took longer. The child, the newest one, the one whose name you barely remembered because no one spoke it in front of you, grew fussy, frustrated. He turned his face away, whimpered, rooted, and then pulled back, unsatisfied. The nursemaid blamed your diet. The lady of the house did not say anything, but her gaze became colder than the drafts. You tried. You drank the thin broth, chewed bread crusts more slowly, tried not to waste your body's heat on tears, But your milk changed anyway. It was no longer the sweet, rich milk that had once quieted babies into a blissful sleep. It tasted, they said, of bitterness. The physicians summoned not for your sake, of course, but for the child's sniffed and prodded and declared that you had stagnation, a word that sounded like punishment. He recommended rest, warmth, and mutton broth. You received none of these things, only more duties, more watching, more waiting. Winter makes ghosts of the living. You began to move like one, thin, quiet, hovering at the edges of doorways. You timed your breath so it wouldn't fog the windows. You learned to hold the child close, not just for his sake, but for your own, because his warmth was the only warmth you knew. You remembered your own baby, then the one you had left behind 2 winters ago. She would be walking now, if she had survived, speaking a few words, maybe asking for you. Did her milk turn bitter, too? Or had the woman who fed her been better fed than you? You didn't dare write to ask. The last letter from home had come months ago, and it had mentioned illness. Coughing through the night. Your sister had said, hard to keep the fire lit. You kept the scrap of that letter folded in the hem of your sleeve, close to your skin, where no one would see it, not because it was secret, but because it was sacred. The only thing left that called you by name. And still, they expected you to give not just milk that was the smallest of things. They wanted calmness, steadiness, warm arms and quiet presence. They wanted a woman who would never falter, whose body would feed without need, whose sorrow would never stain the linens. You gave what you could, but your body, your tired, cold, sorrow-swollen body, began to betray you. Your milk slowed, your warmth diminished. Your eyes, once bright with the duty of survival, began to sink back into themselves. You were there, but less of you arrived each day. No one noticed. They didn't see women like you until something went wrong, and even then, it was the child they examined. You must eat more, the maid scolded. You're not trying hard enough, the nanny said. The baby is restless, the mistress observed. Only the house cat seemed to notice when you shivered. It curled against your ankle at night, drawn by your heat, your quiet, your hunger. Sometimes, you fed it scraps meant for you. At least someone would be fed. Then one day, you woke to blood. Just a thread of it, a warning. Not your time that had long since disappeared, paused by years of nursing, of hunger, of loss, but something else. Your body, speaking in the language of endings. You ignored it, wrapped your chest tighter, went to the nursery. The child screamed. You held him close, tried to hush him, tried not to flinch as he rejected you again. But there was no comfort left in you. Your milk was watery now. Your hands were cracked. Your skin smelled of smoke and wool and cold. No one said it outright, but you knew they were watching. The replacement would come soon. You'd seen it before. In other houses, in other lives. A cart would arrive. A new woman would step down. Her arms strong, her face eager, her body still generous with giving. And you would be sent away. And it would be your fault. Not the winter, not the hunger, not the grief still frozen inside your chest. Yours. You began to pray. Not to God, not anymore, but to the ghost of your own body, the one that had once swelled with abundance. You touched your chest at night and whispered, "One more day, please, just one more day." But it did not listen. Winter teaches you how to disappear gently. You became softer, quieter, easier to forget. And when they finally brought in the new nurse smiling, ruddy-cheeked, smelling of butter and hearth, you did not cry. You folded your blanket. You collected your things. You held the baby one last time. And when he whimpered, you smiled. Not because he remembered you, but because for a moment you remembered yourself. A woman who had given everything, even her warmth, until the season turned her hollow. They gave you a coin, 2 loaves, and a scarf. It was enough. It had to be. She stepped down from the cart with slow feet and uncertain eyes, clutching a bundle that looked newer than anything you'd ever owned. Her shawl was clean. Her hair was plaited tightly, still glistening with oil. There was color in her cheeks, and her boots hadn't yet learned the manor's mud. She looked around as if expecting a welcome. She would learn soon. You had been watching from the side door, half shadowed by the stone arch, not hiding, just waiting. It was always like this. You would hear the rumors before they said them out loud. Milk running thin, the child restless, her colors gone, a quiet word at dinner, then silence the next morning, then a stranger on the path. She was not your enemy. You had to remind yourself of that. She was the next you. You'd once arrived the same way, hopeful, scared, smelling of something simpler. You had looked at the house not as a cage, but a rescue. You didn't yet know how cold the walls could become, how silence could fill your lungs faster than breath. The head maid led her inside, speaking kindly. Her name was something soft. You heard it once, maybe twice. No one repeated it. That was the first lesson. Names didn't matter much here, not unless they belonged to the baby. You stayed by the nursery longer than usual that day, watching the child's chest rise and fall. He didn't know what was coming. Babies never do. They forget faces as fast as they forget dreams. When she came into the room, her smile faltered for just a second. She saw you. She knew. There's a look women give each other in those moments. Not pity, not judgment. Recognition. She didn't know your name either, but she knew your role, because it was about to become hers. The child stirred, fussy from the cold. You reached for him one last time, not to feed him, not even to comfort him, but to pass him forward. Your hands didn't tremble. You'd done this before. Cradled children who would never remember you. Let go of warmth that you'd made inside your own body. The woman stepped forward. She hesitated. Then she took him. That was the moment the world shifted softly, like the turning of a page. You stepped back. She adjusted her grip. The child whimpered once, then settled. Just like that, you were replaced. Not rudely, not cruelly, just quietly, like a candle being snuffed between fingers. There was no ceremony, no farewell, no gratitude. You were given your walking bread and your bundle of cloth, and that was all. Someone handed you a tin cup of weak tea, and it was the warmest thing you'd touched in days. Outside, the frost had started to soften. Mud clung to your boots as you stepped down the same stairs she had come up. You didn't look back. You'd learned not to. Looking back is what makes you weep, and you couldn't afford that kind of softness anymore. Down the road, the trees looked different. You thought of the last child, and the one before that, and the one before. You tried to add them up like coins in a purse, but memory doesn't work that way. Some faces blur. Some cries stay lodged behind the ribs. And then, against your will, you thought of your own child. You hadn't sent a letter in months. What was there to say? That your milk had gone bitter. That your fingers had cracked from scrubbing floors that weren't yours. That you had held 10 infants, but only one was made from your body. You imagined her face, changed by time. Would she recognize you now? You didn't recognize yourself anymore. Your reflection on rare days when you passed a glass had become something thinner, quieter, almost transparent. You no longer expected kindness from mirrors. They showed you what you had survived, and that was all. The road stretched on. The bundle on your back grew heavier, though it held nothing but cloth and silence. You passed a tree you'd once leaned against 2 winters ago. It remembered you better than the manor had. A cart passed, and the driver didn't slow. That was fair. No one saw you now, not as a woman, not as a worker, not even as a witness. You were the empty space between stories. And yet, there was a strange comfort in it. You were no longer responsible, no longer bound to a child's cry, a mistress's expectations, a steward's schedule. You were no one again, and there was a kind of peace in being unseen. You reached the next village by dusk, a small place with crooked chimneys and smoke that smelled of cabbage and pine. You traded a length of thread for a bowl of stew. The woman who gave it to you didn't ask where you'd come from. You ate in silence, but not alone. Others sat near the hearth, not quite nurses, not quite widows, just women with hands like yours and eyes that had once looked directly into winter. Later that night, as you lay on straw in the corner of the common room, you heard a child cry. It wasn't yours, but your arms ached all the same. You turned toward the wall and pressed your face to your sleeve. The wool was stiff, but it smelled faintly of rosewater, the last whisper of the manor you had left behind. You didn't cry. You'd learned long ago how to walk away without weeping. But in your sleep, your body dreamed of letting go. And in the dream, you were not replaced. You simply vanished, like breath in winter. It begins the moment your boots step into familiar soil. You are not expected. No one is. Wet nurses are not sent for, they are sent away. And when they return, they arrive different. Lighter in luggage, heavier in soul. You walk past the well you used to draw from as a girl, past the stone wall where you used to sit and braid your sister's hair. The trees are still in their places. The sky still opens in the same soft blue dome. But the people look at you as if you've returned wearing someone else's face. They don't ask, not directly, but you feel the questions pressed behind their teeth, tucked into their narrowed eyes, their half-turned heads. At the bakery, the girl with the crooked smile does not greet you. At the chapel, the older women murmur into their sleeves. You are no longer one of them. You are a noble's ghost now. They don't understand it, not really. Most of them have never seen the inside of a manor. They've never been told to be silent and tender at the same time. Never had their own name forgotten in favor of nurse. Never touched a golden cradle and known it was a prison. To them, you were lucky. They imagine warm fires, white linens, and honeyed bread. They picture candlelight and velvet. They do not picture a child's cry that never ends, breasts that ache into numbness, hunger that hides in the marrow. They do not picture how silence sticks to your throat even after you come home. Your sister greets you with a look that's part love, part warning. She says, "You're thinner." She does not say, "You look like a stranger." Your child peers at you from behind her leg. She's older now, of course. 3, maybe 4. Her mouth is shaped like yours, but she does not call you mother. She calls your sister Ma. You kneel, say her name. She blinks, then hides. You stay anyway. The house is too small now, not in size, but in memory. You used to belong to it. Now, you're a guest, the kind no one knows how to welcome. Your hands reach for the pot, the broom, the water pail, but your sister insists, rest. You've worked enough. You haven't. You always will. At night, the village girls gather near the edge of the fields. You hear them laughing, not cruelly, but not kindly either. You recognize their voices, girls, who used to borrow your ribbons, ask for stories, hold your hand when they were scared. Now they whisper. They say things they don't understand, that you were kept in soft beds, that you were too close to the master's children, that your silence means shame, that your silence means secrets. Some say you were dismissed because of something you did. Others say you were touched too often or not enough. No one says, "She survived." You don't correct them. You sit by the window with your sewing, letting the candle melt slowly beside your mending. You stitch, and the needle trembles in your hand, not from weakness but from memory. You once stitched hymns for noble sons, lining them with letters they'd never read. Now you patch aprons again. The difference is unbearable and invisible all at once. Some nights, a girl will approach you, shy, eyes flicking to the side. She'll ask, "What was it like?" You will say nothing, not out of cruelty, but because there is no language for that place. How do you describe a life where your body was used like a tool, then discarded like a dull knife? How do you explain the mourning of being forgotten by a child who once suckled at your breast? How do you explain that your arms still wake at night, reaching for babies that aren't there? You cannot. So instead, you shake your head and return to your stitching. The girl will wait, then walk away. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you came back strange. They won't know you never came back at all, not completely. Even your sleep has changed. It used to be heavy, clean. Now it's broken, like old wood. You dream of corridors and half-whispered names. You wake reaching, always reaching. One evening, you walk to the river, the one you used to wash in as a child. The water is colder now. You kneel, roll up your sleeves, and rinse your hands. Your reflection stares back older, thinner, yes, but not ruined, just quieter. You whisper your own name. You say it aloud, softly. No one hears, but you do. And it feels like stepping back into your own skin. You dry your hands on your skirt and walk home slowly, not because you're tired, but because for once, no one is waiting. It is a kind of freedom, not joyful, but real. You pass two girls gathering firewood. They stop talking when they see you. One of them blushes. The other tilts her head, curious. You nod, then keep walking. You don't owe them a story. They'll write their own soon enough. And when they return, hollowed and silenced, they'll know the village girls whisper not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of what might become of them when the manor calls their name. Fear of becoming like you. But you are done whispering. Let them talk. It happens not with a cry, not with a gasp, not even with the pain you once feared would come. It happens slowly, quietly, so slowly, in fact, that at first you think the child has simply grown less hungry, that the cold has numbed your skin too deeply, that maybe you're tired, not failing. But then, day after day, the milk doesn't come. And when it does, it's less than it should be, less than it was. The fullness fades, the ache vanishes, and that should be relief, but it isn't, because in its place is a stillness that feels like absence. Your body has gone quiet in a way it never has before. You stare at your chest in the wash basin's reflection, a thin, pale outline of something that once nourished others, something that once mattered, in a way you never asked for but learned to live inside, something that once tethered you, not to status or praise, but to purpose, however painful, however invisible. And now it is gone. The women around you, the other nurses, the maidens in the manor, the women in your village, they do not mention it, not directly, but you feel it in their movements, in the way they glance at you during mealtimes, in the way no child is brought toward your arms anymore. You try to keep busy. You take on other tasks, mending sleeves, scouring floors, bringing in logs when the frost deepens at dusk. You wipe down the wooden rails of the nursery crib, even when no child sleeps in it. You tell yourself it's enough, that work is work, that usefulness has other forms. But your body remembers what it was once asked to do. It remembers the tug of a newborn's lips, the warmth of milk leaving flesh, the way a child's sigh melted against your skin like fog. It remembers the curve of small fingers pressing against your ribs, the way your heart adjusted its beat to match the weight of a baby falling asleep against you. These memories don't fade. They haunt, not because they were joyful, not exactly, but because they were undeniable. You existed. You mattered. You fed life into someone, again and again and again. Now, the body that once gave has become a shell. Not barren, just retired. The women who have never nursed think it must be a freedom. They imagine your sigh of relief. No more aching, no more leaking, no more binding your chest in desperation, when the milk soaked through bodices and betrayed your exhaustion. But it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like being dismissed from something ancient and sacred. You begin to walk longer in the fields, not because there is anything to harvest. It's not that season, but because the air is clean, and no one asks anything of you there. The wind doesn't care that your body has stopped giving. The earth does not judge. You speak aloud sometimes, words you never dared say in the manor halls. Things like, I wanted more, and I was tired, and I never asked for that child, but I loved him anyway. The sky absorbs these confessions and gives you only silence in return. Some nights, you wake with your arms around nothing, still curved, still instinctive, as if a child were resting there. You hold the air tighter for a second, then release. The village midwife, an older woman with brittle knuckles and a shawl that smells of smoke, pulls you aside one day near the well. She says nothing for a while, only watching your hands as they rinse the bucket's rim. Then, softly, she says, It's gone, hasn't it? You nod, just once. She nods too, as if to say yes, it goes. Everything does. She presses something into your palm, a cloth sachet of dried lavender, maybe, or old thyme. For your bones, she says. They ache more after. You take it. You do not cry. There is no mourning ceremony for a body that stops giving. No ribbon tied, no black veil, no gathering of voices to say, she was a vessel once. No one says, thank you for all you fed that was never yours to keep. Instead, the world simply moves on. A new child is born, a new nurse is called, a new name is sewn into the corner of the nursery cloth. And you sweep, you fold, you become the woman who watches. The one the new girls do not speak to, but always glance toward. The one who seems to know something they do not yet have the words for. The one whose silence feels heavy, but not sharp. In time, your body becomes your own again. You do not fear touch. You do not long for the ache. You begin to walk straighter. You begin to eat better. You begin to dream not of the past, but of things still ahead. A small herb garden, a roof that doesn't leak, a winter with less coughing. They're not grand dreams, but they're yours. And even now, even with your chest flattened by time, with no child's cheek resting against it, you sometimes feel warmth spread from your ribs outward. Not milk, not grief, just warmth. Memory, perhaps, or healing, or the quiet dignity of being someone who gave more than she was ever given. You lift the hem of your apron, press it to your eyes, and smile into the fabric. The gesture is unseen. You do not need an audience. After all, your body may have stopped giving, but you are not done yet. At first, it seems like a kindness. You hear it through a letter, passed to your village from another servant still in the manor. The baby, the new one, the one after the one you nursed, is called by your name. A girl this time, pink and soft and wide-eyed, and she is called the name your mother gave you, the name that used to mean you. You hold the folded page for a long time. You don't read it again. Once is enough. They named her after you, but not because of love, not because you mattered, not because they remembered how gently you lifted that child, or how your fingers trembled with care each time you checked the breath at the mouth, or how you once sang under your breath to hush a fevered cry. No, it was convenience. A placeholder? Something to call her while they waited for inspiration, or for someone of higher rank to visit and make a suggestion. Your name filled the space like straw in a mattress. Good enough for now. Soft, familiar, easily replaced. And yet, the name is yours. You whisper it aloud when no one's watching, just to hear how it sounds again. You watch your mouth shape it in the basin's reflection. It feels smaller now, like a coat that's been shrunk in water. Still yours, but tighter, quieter. You wonder if the new baby cries the way the last one did, high, sharp, like a ribbon pulled too tight. You wonder if the new wet nurse is younger, with fuller arms and steadier hands. You wonder if she has learned yet that her name doesn't belong to her anymore. Not really. That's what happens when you serve in silence. First, they take your time, then your body, then your voice, and then, when you've gone, they use your name like a tag on a basket, something to carry a baby across a room, something to call out down a hallway. You never thought it would matter. You told yourself it's just a name. But when your own daughter, the one you left behind, forgets to say it when she calls you aunt instead of mama, the name becomes everything. You do not correct her. There is no point. You already lost that word in the manor, wrapped it in linen, fed it to someone else's child. You gave it away when the baby you nursed first smiled at you, not with recognition, but with hunger. Still, the knowledge sits inside you. There is a baby with your name now. She will crawl, speak, grow. Her hands will grasp things you never touched. Her hair might be washed by someone with clean nails and silver rings. Her feet will wear tiny slippers you once stitched. And people will call her your name, as if she invented it. You hear stories through the grapevine. She is fussy, or clever, or small for her age. That she likes apricots, dislikes the sound of bells. You picture her in the old nursery, the fire burning too hot or too low, the blankets tucked too tight. You used to adjust those. You used to matter in the ways no one thanked you for. Sometimes, in dreams, you stand over her crib again, not the new baby, the one from before, the one who once reached for you in sleep. You try to sing, but your voice doesn't come. You try to touch her cheek, but your hand passes through her like smoke. You wake with your fingers curled into your palm, as if still holding the thread of that dream. They named the baby after you. It should feel like a legacy. Instead, it feels like erasure. You go to the river again. It has become a habit now, a kind of pilgrimage. You wash your hands, your face, the back of your neck. You let the cold bite. Let it remind you that you are still here, that you have not vanished. No matter how many babies wear your name like a dress you outgrew. A girl from the village joins you. She is young, maybe 16. Her arms are thin, her eyes already tired in a way that worries you. She asks, "Did you really work in the manor?" You nod. "Was it beautiful?" You pause. "No," you say, "but it was quiet." She doesn't understand what that means yet. You hope she never will. She dips her hands into the river, then asks, "Is it true they named a baby after you?" You smile, not happily. "Yes." "That's nice," she says. "Maybe?" She stands, drying her hands on her skirt. She does not look at you as she leaves. You are used to that. Back home, your sister is mending socks. Your daughter, no, not your daughter, not anymore, is chasing a chicken through the yard, laughing. Her joy is bright, wild. You drink it in from the doorway like sunlight, and you try not to think of how much she resembles the child you left. You sit, you sew, you listen to the sound of her laughter. It does not carry your name, and yet you do not mind. Names are only one kind of memory. There are others. The smell of milk on linen, the curve of a cheek against your chest, the song you hummed when the wind howled outside the manor walls. These are yours, unnamed, unclaimed. You take the letter and place it under the hearthstone. Not burned, just buried. Let the new baby grow. Let her live, and forget the shape of the woman she was named after. Let her carry it, never knowing it once belonged to someone who whispered lullabies into silence. They named the baby after you, but that doesn't mean she is you. You are more than the name they borrowed. You are what they couldn't keep, no matter how many cradles they filled. It doesn't surprise you anymore, the absence, the way your name fades from ledgers, from lips, from lists of household staff. You knew this ending long before it arrived. Still, there is something hollow about watching it play out like the echo after a church bell, too distant to locate, too near to ignore. There was never any parchment, no contract, no signature to prove you were ever there, let alone needed. Just a cradle, a child, a house that swallowed your footsteps. And when your milk ran dry, so did the ink of memory. You are not mentioned in the letters between noble cousins, not in the dowry records, not even in the baptismal books of the babies you fed. You gave your life to lives that would not remember you, not out of malice, just indifference. That's what stings most. Not the erasure, but the silence it leaves behind. A silence so total, it makes you question if the crying ever really happened, if the nursing, the rocking, the sleepless nights were anything more than some quiet, aching dream. You visit the graveyard sometimes, not for anyone in particular, just to walk among the names, to see them carved in stone, held in place by lichen and time. Some of them belong to women like you, maids, nurses, midwives. Most don't say much. Just Anna, wife of Thomas, or M. 1702. Others bear no names at all, just infant. You wonder which one you'll become. There's a woman at the edge of the cemetery who weaves baskets from straw and ashwood. She tells you that names only matter to those who remember them. A name's a door, she says, but not everyone gets one that stays open. You nod. You think of all the doors you've passed through, all the cribs you've leaned over, all the children who learned to turn their faces from you the moment they learned to speak. They don't remember the smell of your skin, or how your hands never shook, even when you hadn't slept. They remember portraits, jewelry, the way their mother smiled at court. But not you, not the woman who held them first. You keep a bundle beneath your mattress, a folded cloth with faint milk stains, still holding a shape that once curled against your chest. A single wooden bead from a baby's bracelet, a lock of hair not from your own child, but one you were told to cut when the fever took hold. You kept it anyway. Your memory lives there, not in ink, not in stone, in fragments, in fabric, in breath. And when you sit by the fire at night, when the others have gone to bed, and the embers hiss soft farewells, you let your hands rest in your lap and feel the shape of the years pressing back. You don't weep, you don't speak. You just are, and maybe, in some way, that is enough. You are not a name on a list. You are not a line in a book. You are the silence between those lines. You are the hush in a nursery after a baby sleeps. You are the stillness that came before the child's first cry. And though no one will recite you in a history of noble lineages, or honor you at the winter feast, you know what you carried, what you gave, what you endured in the dim candlelight of someone else's home. The house forgets you, the family forgets you, even the child forgets you, but the walls remember your footsteps, the cradle remembers your breath, and the silence, it remembers your name, not as sound, but as presence, as weight, as love that asked for nothing and gave everything. That is where you live now, not in words, but in the hush. The hush that follows lullabies. The hush that settles after long pain. The hush where your name should have been, and somehow still is. You followed her far through rooms that whispered, through winters that stole, through children who reached and then forgot. You've stood where no one remembered her name, and still, you knew she mattered. Maybe you've known someone like her. Maybe you were her in another life, a caretaker, a giver, someone who watched others grow while shrinking quietly in the corners. And still, you gave more. You always did. History doesn't often speak of women like her. No portraits, no letters, no ballads or odes, just lives stitched into the hems of richer stories, soaked into cloth, pressed into silence. And yet, you've heard her now, maybe in the softness of your breath, maybe in the way you carry the weight of others, maybe in how you remember people who never remembered you. Let that be enough tonight. Let the hush hold her name and yours in the place history forgot. Let the lights dim. Let the room go still. You don't need to carry anyone else now. You've walked far enough tonight. Let the floorboards hold the rest. And if you're still awake, was it a little easier this time?